The endless thunder of Hive Tranche 9 never ceased, even in the deepest levels where the air was thick with rust, smoke, and rot. The world still vibrated with the pulse of machines. The manufactoria above never slept, never paused, a billion servitors hammering, cutting, and burning without end. Down here, though, the sound changed. It was slower, heavier, more human. Thump, hiss, grind. Each rhythm was deliberate, each motion precise, each sound part of a sacred sequence. Mago's vivisector Hallex stood at the center of a surgical cathedral, his cathedral. The ceiling was low, armored with blackened steel that dripped condensation from the heat of the vats. Red candles burned beside altars of chrome, their flames casting trembling shadows across the rusted walls. Every shadow was alive, cables hung like vines, their ends twitching as though they longed for flesh to pierce. The air smelled of burnt incense, blood, and machine oil, a tang that clung to the lungs, coating every breath with iron and faith. In the heart of the room, an operating slab stood beneath a halo of flickering light. The slab was wet. On it lay a man, or what had once been one. The subject's name had been Guardsman Rel. The remnants of his fatigues were still visible, torn cloth bearing the faded aquila of the Imperium, soaked through with blood. His chest was open, ribs spread apart by mechadendrites that hummed with energy. Tubes pumped synthetic fluid through his veins, and his heart, now replaced by a whirring mechanism, beat with a rhythmic click. Hallex moved like a spider among his instruments. His robes of crimson and black were embroidered with silver cogs and holy scripture in high Gothic. His human face was gone, replaced by a lattice of bronze plates, glass lenses, and a respirator grill that rasped with every breath. Behind his mask, the Magos whispered a litany, his voice deep and reverent. Blessed is the flesh that accepts the machine. Bless the blood that welcomes the circuit. Flesh is weak, but through the mechanicum, flesh is perfected. A mechanical limb extended from his back, ending in a scalpel that glowed faintly blue. The blade hummed as it descended toward the exposed chest cavity. The guardsman convulsed. His eyes, replaced by polished glass orbs, stared upward without focus. Every muscle quivered, but the restraints held firm. "Do not fear, child of the Emperor," Hallex crooned, voice distorted by vox. "Pain is but the hymn of transformation." The scalpel slid between ribs with surgical precision. Steam rose as the blade cut flesh and soldered it shut simultaneously. Hallex guided a series of silver tubes into the cavity, connecting them to sockets he had carved into bone. Small sparks danced between connectors as the organic tissue bonded to metal. "For the Omnissiah," Hallex whispered, "let your heart beat not by chance, but by purpose." He reached into a tray beside the slab, retrieving a heart-shaped device of glass and steel. It pulsed faintly, as if breathing on its own. Tiny pistons pumped fluid through miniature valves. Hallex raised it high, turning it toward the shrine at the end of the room, a crude effigy of the machine god, built from gears and skulls fused together. The hollow eye sockets of servitor skulls glowed red as though watching. "Witness, divine engine," Hallex intoned, "the union of form and function. Accept this offering that your perfection may live within this vessel." With a hiss, he pressed the artificial heart into the man's open chest. The mechanism clicked into place, and the guardsman arched violently, foam spilling from his lips. A surge of light rippled through the cables embedded in the walls. For a moment, the entire chamber came alive. Machines howled, auger screens flickered with binary prayers, and the icons of the cog mechanicus blazed crimson. Pulse detected, droned a monotone voice from the server altar. Halix's lenses flared brighter. He began the litany of integration. Oil of union, sanctify this flesh. Code of union, rewrite this soul. Blood of weakness, be replaced by coolant of faith. Each verse was punctuated by the hum of tools. A rotating saw replaced the scalpel, trimming the ribs so the new organ fit seamlessly. Another mechadendrite injected data slivers into the man's spine, slivers engraved with sacred algorithms. Rel's mouth opened, and a distorted moan escaped, half scream, half mechanical feedback. Then, abruptly, he spoke. FF flesh, divine. Halix froze, his hands trembled slightly, a rare flaw in his otherwise perfect composure. The phrase was not from the litany, it was spontaneous, unprogrammed. He leaned closer, repeated subject. The voice came again, deeper, mechanical. Praise the flesh divine. Halix laughed softly, a chilling sound that echoed off the steel. Yes, yes, you understand, the flesh is not the weakness, it is the foundation. Only through the machine does it ascend. He adjusted a dial on his forearm, and the cables began to retract, sealing the wound with synthetic skin that shimmered faintly. When it was done, the guardsman's chest bore a faint scar, almost elegant, perfectly symmetrical. The man's body relaxed, his breathing steadied, but his eyes, those glass orbs, glowed faintly red now, mirroring Halix's own. Rise, the Magos commanded. The newly reborn soldier obeyed, sitting up slowly. His movements were smooth yet unnatural, guided by unseen circuits. Halix stepped back, arms outstretched like a preacher before his congregation. Around him, servo skulls descended from the rafters, chanting vox-encoded prayers. Behold, Halix said softly, the perfect prayer. The man turned his head toward him. Perfect prayer. Speak your faith. The creation hesitated. Then, voice distorted and layered with static, he said, the Omnissiah blesses the union of flesh and machine. Halix trembled. For a moment, beneath all the machinery and doctrine, a spark of something almost human crossed his mind, pride, perhaps even awe. But then the flicker of emotion vanished, only logic remained. He moved to a data terminal at the side of the room. Rows of symbols scrolled across the screen, displaying biological metrics, spiritual resonance readings, neural code purity, all perfect. The experiment was a success. Subject 42B, Halix recorded. Integration complete. Neural synchronization achieved at 99.9% efficiency. Residual human error negligible. He paused. His mechanical hand hovered over the console. Designation, Choir of Flesh, Mark 1. The term pleased him. The new creation stood silently, awaiting command. Halix turned to face him, his robes whispering against the blood-slick floor. Do you feel pain? Pain is prayer. Do you feel faith? Faith is command. Halix nodded slowly. Then you are ready. He gestured to the far wall, where several more slabs waited, each holding another body prepared for transformation. Some were missing limbs, others had their skulls opened, the brain exposed to cold light. Hallex raised his arms. "Brothers and sisters of the Mechanicum," he whispered to the air, "the choir shall rise, and when it sings, the Omnissiah will hear his true voice." The servo-skulls responded with shrill bursts of binary. Somewhere in the dark, pistons engaged, and mechanical claws descended, gripping the next body. Hallex began again. Incision, implant, recitation. Hours turned to cycles. Each surgery more complex, more transcendent. The air grew thicker with incense and blood. Every time, the results spoke the same words: "Praise the flesh divine." Soon, a dozen of them stood around the Magos, silent except for the faint whir of servos within their bodies. Their skin gleamed faintly silver, veins coursing with liquid metal. They were not human anymore, but neither were they machine. They were something new. Hallex walked among them like a prophet among angels. But within his augmented mind, a voice, faint, mechanical, whispered, "Error 0.01% deviation detected." He froze. "Show deviation," he commanded. The Auspex display projected from his wrist, showing a flicker of erratic code, neural activity that did not match the implant's programming. "Impossible," he hissed. "The flesh is obedient." Yet the readings continued. Deep within each creation's cortex, something organic persisted, a pulse of chaos, unpredictable, human. The Magos tilted his head, a flaw or a message. He leaned closer to one of his creations, Subject 42B, the first and most stable. "Speak to me." The being looked at him with glassy eyes. For a long moment there was silence, then it whispered, "You took my soul." Hallex felt a flicker of static across his neural link, a surge of emotion that wasn't his own. Fear, pain, rage. He disconnected immediately, breathing hard through his respirator. Error must be purged. He raised a mechadendrite armed with a cauterizer and prepared to burn the brain clean. But then, as if the machine god itself intervened, all 12 of the creations spoke in unison. "Perfection requires pain." The sound rattled the chamber, vox amplified, layered, inhuman. Hallex staggered back, lenses flaring. They were chanting, not his litany, something else, something ancient and wrong. He listened and realized it was his own words, repeated back to him, twisted into something almost worshipful. A tremor ran through him. Was this madness or revelation? Slowly, a smile formed beneath the respirator. "Yes," he whispered, "you understand." He lowered the cauterizer. "You are the flesh reborn, the first verse of the great mechanic hymn. Through you, I shall reveal the truth. The machine god is not separate from man. He is man perfected." Hallex reached for the cog-shaped sigil at his chest, pressing it to his heart. "And I am his surgeon." The creations bowed as one. From the darkness, the hum of machinery deepened. The entire hive level seemed to pulse with life, as though responding to the birth of something divine and terrible. Above, in the manufactoria, workers paused, hearing a strange resonance echoing from the depths. They crossed themselves and whispered prayers, but none dared investigate. Below, Mago's vivisector Halix raised his arms toward the shrine, his voice thundering through voxcasters. Let the choir be born, let the Omnissiah hear us through blood and steel. Let the Imperium see that the flesh is not weakness, it is sacred machinery. And as he spoke, his new creations began to sing, not with voices, but with the grinding harmony of gears, the rhythm of pistons, the pulse of synthetic hearts. The sound was horrifying, beautiful, divine. It filled the hive's veins, rising through pipes and ducts until even the surface workers could hear it, a low, haunting vibration that lingered long after silence returned. Some said it was the echo of machines, others swore it was the cry of the damned. For Halix, it was music, the first note of his eternal symphony. The echo of the hymn still lingered in the lower hives when Inquisitor Vareth Cordain arrived. He came not with trumpets nor banners, but with silence. His ship, the Vigilant Reproach, descended through the smog-shrouded skis of Tranche like a blade cutting through diseased flesh. Its engines growled low, thrumming with restrained fury as it settled on a platform blackened by centuries of ash. Hive Tranche 9 was a graveyard of progress, a monument to decay. From orbit, it looked like a vast metal carcass rotting beneath its own weight. From within, it felt alive, a sprawling labyrinth of filth, fanaticism, and forgotten gods. The moment Vareth stepped out of the lander, the air hit him, thick, acidic, alive with the taste of industry. He inhaled it through his rebreather and felt it sting like penance. He was tall, his frame wrapped in the black robes of the Ordo Hereticus. Beneath the cowl, his eyes burned with the pale fire of one who had seen too much. A rosette of silver hung from his chest, the sigil of the Inquisition, but it gleamed dull, as if the hive itself refused to reflect it. Behind him trailed his retinue. Sister Enara, a silent warrior of the Adepta Sororitas, her armor etched with prayers and the marks of flame. Interrogator Malk, a pale young man whose left arm was entirely mechanical, its fingers twitching like a spider's legs. Servoskull 317, a floating skull adorned with Auspex arrays, vox grills, and the faint whine of a soul that refused to rest. Together, they descended into the hive's throat, toward the source of the machine hymn that had reached the Inquisition's ears. The descent was endless. Down through the levels of industry, each one darker and more corrupt than the last. The upper manufactoria were loud but orderly, filled with endless lines of laborers and servitors crafting the Emperor's weapons. But below, discipline decayed into madness. Mutants scurried through the corridors, whispering prayers to rusted icons. Cog banners hung tattered from the ceilings, their inscriptions replaced with crude scrawls of devotion. Men with glowing eyes preached of the flesh divine, and those who listened carved strange symbols into their skin. At level 97, Enara stopped. Corruption, she hissed. Her voice was low but sharp as a blade. It's in the air. It smells like faith turned wrong. Vareth nodded. The Heretic's influence runs deep. Be ready. Malk knelt by a wall where a sigil had been burned into the steel, a crude mix of the Imperial Aquila and the Cog Mechanicus fused into a blasphemous shape. "This is new," he murmured. "Fresh. Someone's spreading doctrine down here." The Inquisitor placed his hand over the mark. The metal was warm. "They are spreading worship," he said, "but not to the Omnissiah, to something that pretends to be him." The tunnels narrowed, the air thickened. Screams echoed somewhere ahead, the shrieks of tortured machinery, or perhaps something else entirely. Servoskull 317 hovered forward, its Auspex lights flickering. "Detection, biosignatures multiple, human and augmented," it droned. Vareth drew his weapon, an ancient plasma pistol, its surface engraved with the words "Purge the false flesh." The weapon hummed faintly in his hand, alive with holy power. Beside him, Inara ignited her flamer, the sacred promethium casting an orange halo around her armor. When they entered the chamber beyond, the light revealed hell. Dozens of bodies hung from the ceiling on metal hooks. Some were skinned, others were grafted with machinery that pulsed like living veins. Tubes snaked from open wounds into the walls, pumping crimson fluid through the room like a circulatory system for the hive itself. And beneath it all, the floor, a vast metal grate, shifted slightly with every breath. Something alive moved below it. Inara crossed herself. "Emperor, preserve us." Vareth didn't answer. His eyes were on the central altar. There, half buried in shadow, stood a figure in red robes, motionless, waiting. Its face was hidden behind a lattice of bronze, and its limbs were long, wrong, jointed like a machine. Vareth stepped forward. "Magos vivisector halix," he said, voice echoing. "By order of the Inquisition, you are charged with heresy, biological heretech experimentation, and the defilement of imperial doctrine." The figure's head tilted. A hiss escaped the mask. "Your voice is like rust," Halleck said softly. "Inquisitor Cordain, yes, the hunter of flesh saints, I know your work." "Then you know what comes next," Vareth replied. "Repentance through death." Hallex took a step forward, robes shifting to reveal multiple mechadendrites ending in saws, syringes, and drills. "Death," his voice distorted, layered with metallic echoes. "No, Inquisitor, I have transcended death. I have made it obsolete." Inara raised her flamer. "Then you can burn with the rest of your kind." Hallex lifted one clawed hand. Instantly, the walls came alive. Panels split open, revealing the choir, a dozen of his creations, standing silent until now. Their eyes glowed crimson. Their limbs gleamed like polished steel. Flesh and metal merged seamlessly, pulsing with eerie light. When they moved, it was soundless, a dance of precision and faith. "Behold," Hallex whispered, "the hymn made flesh." Vareth fired. The plasma bolt struck one of the creations square in the chest, burning through armor, flesh, and bone. The thing staggered, fell, then stood again, steam rising from the hole in its body. "Faith sustains them," Halleck said almost reverently. "Not your emperor, but mine." The chamber erupted in violence. Inara unleashed her flamer, the sacred fire bathing the front ranks of the choir. Screams filled the air, not human screams, but the grinding cry of metal warping under heat. Some fell, melting into slag and ash. Others charged through the flames, their bodies aflame, uncaring. Malk drew his chain blade, its teeth whirring, and plunged into the melee. Sparks flew as metal met metal. The creations fought like predators, fast, coordinated, their movements guided by some shared intelligence. Vareth fired again and again, each shot tearing through the abominations. His plasma pistol hummed with fury, but for everyone he felled, another took its place. Hallex moved among them, untouched. His mechadendrites whipped through the air, deflecting bullets and fire alike. "You see," he called, his voice rising over the chaos. "Your Emperor's machine is broken, his servants are blind, but I restore his vision." He slammed one mechadendrite into the floor. The entire chamber shuddered. The grate split open, and from below rose something massive, a construct of flesh and iron, stitched together from corpses and servitors. Its body was a cathedral of suffering, skulls for joints, spines for cables, lungs turned into engines. It bellowed, a sound like a dying god. Vareth braced himself as debris rained down. "Inara, fall back." But the sister ignored him. She stepped forward, her armor blackened, her flamer empty. "By the Emperor's grace," she whispered, drawing her power sword, "you will burn." She leapt, slicing through the abomination's reaching limb, sparks flying. The sword bit deep into the creature's chest, igniting the fluids within. For a heartbeat, light consumed the chamber. Then the explosion came. Vareth was thrown backward. The world turned red, then black. When he awoke, there was only silence. Smoke drifted through the ruined chamber. The walls were scorched, the machinery still twitching with dying power. Half of the choir lay scattered in pieces. The rest were gone. Inara's body lay near the altar, armor cracked, her face peaceful even in death. Malk was slumped against the wall, breathing shallowly, his mechanical arms sparking. And Hallex nowhere to be seen. Vareth forced himself to stand, blood running from a wound at his temple. He staggered toward the altar. There, amid the ash, lay a single data slate, untouched by the fire. On it a message. To the Inquisitor Cordain. "You have seen the imperfect birth of divinity. I thank you for it. The choir is not destroyed, it is dispersed. The flesh learns, adapts, evolves. Even now, I hear their voices in the machine. When next you pray, listen closely. You may hear them singing. Hallex, Magos of the flesh divine." The slate went dark. Vareth stood there for a long time, the hum of dying machines whispering around him. Finally, he turned to the servo-skull hovering beside him. "Seal this level," he ordered. "Purge it. Nothing leaves this hive." The skull blinked red. Affirmative. He looked one last time at Inara's body, then at the shattered altar. "Emperor, forgive me," he muttered, "but faith alone cannot stop the machine." He raised his pistol and fired into the data slate, shattering it into molten shards. Above him, in the endless levels of the hive, the machinery began to stir again, faint whispers of binary hymns echoing through the ducts. The song was softer now, almost tender, but it was spreading. The choir of flesh was still singing. The operating theater stank of oil and despair. 1,000 servitors lined the walls like corpses bolted to steel, their torsos wired into sockets, their eyes hollow, their lips sewn shut. Each one exhaled the soft hiss of recycled air, as though the room itself breathed. A massive circular light hung above the main surgical slab, bathing the space in white luminescence that made every drop of blood glisten like molten rubies. Patient 47C was strapped to the slab, a former guardsman, now nothing more than a number on a slate. His eyes darted wildly, reflecting the cold steel looming over him. Thin tubes slithered across his skin, feeding anesthetic that dulled his pain but left his mind awake, awake enough to understand, to fear, to scream. Across from him stood Magos Biologis Carthan Vale, his face a latticework of metal and scar tissue. Half his skull was transparent adamantium, revealing a pulsing brain sheathed in nutrient gel. His remaining flesh was pale, stretched taut by cybernetic grafts. He did not blink. He hadn't needed to in years. Specimen retention at 62%, Vale murmured, his voice metallic and distorted. Subject displays high resistance to neural dampening. Intriguing. The Mechanicus acolytes surrounding him moved like extensions of his will, silent, obedient, soulless. They passed scalpels, drills, and vials of glowing serum with mechanical precision. One of them inserted a long needle into the patient's temple, releasing a hiss as white vapor escaped. Patient 47C whimpered. His lips trembled as he tried to speak, but a servo clamp held his jaw in place. "Please," he managed through a distorted whisper, "I served the Emperor." Vale turned slightly, studying him. "And you continue to serve guardsmen," he replied, voice calm but cold. "Your body is weak, but your neural structure will live on. You will become useful, purified through the machine god's mercy." A shriek of metal cut through the air as the first incision began. The autosurgeon's limbs unfolded like a spider, each tool whirring to life, saws, scalpels, injectors. The first blade sliced through flesh with surgical grace. Blood pooled, bright and vivid under the white light, streaming into collection drains. The guardsman's muffled scream echoed against the steel walls. "Hold steady," Vale commanded. His mechadendrites extended, wrapping around the man's wrists. "Pain is transitory, knowledge is eternal." One acolyte whispered a binary prayer as a chunk of bone was removed. The hum of the machinery became a chant. The litanies of the Mechanicus filled the room, data streams merging with the rhythm of flesh being dismantled. It was worship. It was horror. Vale replaced the soldier's left arm with a gleaming mechanical limb, wires fusing with sinew. Sparks cascaded from the graft site as the circuits came alive, the limb twitching unnaturally. The body convulsed, then fell still, save for rapid breathing. "Excellent reaction time," Vale muttered, watching the data spike across his retinal display. "Cortex response above threshold. Proceed to spinal integration." He reached for a tool shaped like a claw and plunged it into the patient's spine. A flash of blue light rippled through the body, tendons stiffened, veins turned black, and smoke rose from the incision. The guardsman's eyes rolled back as a raw scream tore from his throat, so loud that the servitors shuddered in their sockets. Vale smiled, or what was left of his mouth curved upward. "Do you feel it, guardsman?" he whispered. "That is rebirth. The old flesh dies, the Omnissiah remakes you." Suddenly a flicker in the lumen lights, then a power surge. The machines trembled. Sparks spat from the ceiling conduits. The autosurgeon paused mid-motion. One of the servitors convulsed violently, tearing free of its restraints before collapsing. Vale turned his head, irritated. "Unacceptable interference," he hissed, sending streams of data through his mechadendrite into a nearby console. Identify the fault. But the fault wasn't mechanical. From behind one of the glass observation walls, an overseer's corpse lay slumped, its throat slit, its control panel smeared with blood. In the upper gantry, a shadow moved, quick, silent, watching. "Magos," whispered an acolyte, fear in his synthetic voice. Unauthorized movement detected. A burst of gunfire ripped through the upper level. A body fell, landing hard with a metallic clang. Chaos erupted. The intruder, a figure in ragged armor, face half covered by a rebreather, leapt from the gantry, landing amidst the Mechanicus attendants. With brutal speed, he swung a vibroknife, cutting through cables and throats alike. Sparks flew, blood sprayed. The surgical lights flickered again. The stranger grabbed the slab, unstrapping the patient as Vale's eyes burned bright red. "Cease interference," he roared. "This specimen is sacred property of the Mechanicus." The intruder's voice was cold and raw. "He's human, not property." With that, he jammed a grenade under the slab and dove. The explosion was deafening, a wave of fire and smoke that shattered glass and sent machine parts flying. Vale's body was hurled backward, half of his robes torn away, exposing the machinery that kept him alive. Through the haze, the intruder dragged the barely conscious guardsman across the floor. The man's new mechanical arm twitched violently, responding to stray machine spirits in the air. "Stay with me," the intruder urged, his voice trembling with effort. "We're not done yet." Vale rose, metal grinding against metal. His voice became a screech. "You dare profane my work, the Omnissiah will claim you for scrap." He extended his mechadendrites, launching them forward like steel whips. The intruder ducked, firing his pistol. Bolts of plasma carved glowing wounds across Vale's chest. Oil and blood mingled. The air reeked of burning flesh. "Your ignorance damns you," Vale growled. "Flesh is weakness. You are doomed to rot." The intruder turned his gaze on him, fierce, desperate. "Then I'll rot human." He pulled the trigger again. The plasma bolt pierced Vale's cranial plate, exploding his head in a blinding flash. Sparks rained down. The Mago's body convulsed, then fell, twitching as his systems failed. Silence followed, broken only by the faint hiss of cooling metal. The intruder stood there for a long moment, chest heaving. The guardsman on the floor tried to speak, but only managed a rasp. "Who are you?" The stranger crouched beside him, lifting his head gently. "Someone who escaped this hell," he said softly, "and I'm not leaving anyone else behind." But in the shadowed corners of the ward, among the inert servitors and shattered glass, tiny red lights blinked to life again, machine spirits stirring, recording, whispering. The Omnissiah's gaze never truly left. The screams had stopped, but the machines remembered, and soon they would rebuild. Smoke hung thick in the shattered ward. The air was heavy with the stink of burned oil, cauterized flesh, and ozone discharge. The fire from the detonated grenade still hissed in the corner, crawling up the walls like a living thing. The lights flickered in broken rhythm, casting brief flashes across the devastation, the ruined slab, the mangled servitors, and the half-destroyed shell of Mago's Vale lying sprawled like a discarded idol. The intruder coughed, clutching his rebreather as he helped the wounded guardsman to his feet. The man's new mechanical limbs sparked uncontrollably, twitching and jerking as if possessed. He could barely stand, his eyes wide, filled with animal fear. "It's in me," he gasped. "It burns." "Stay calm," the intruder said, voice hoarse from smoke. "That implant's got its own power core. I'll find a way to shut it off." He tore a length of fabric from his coat and wrapped it around the mechanical stump, tightening it to cut off the spreading current. The lights sputtered again. For a moment, silence reigned, the kind that made the ears ache. Then a sound broke it. A soft, wet slap. Then another. The intruder froze. Slowly, he turned his head toward the far wall, toward the bodies of the servitors and attendants he'd just killed. They were moving. The first one, a half-human thing with tubes instead of veins, twitched. Its metal spine arched, the cables in its neck writhing like worms. Then, with a crackling noise, its head jerked upward. Its eyes, long dead and pale, burned to life with a dull red glow. The next one followed, and another. The sound of movement grew, clicking limbs, hissing vents, the grind of gears flexing after decades of rust. The intruder's stomach turned. Emperor's mercy. He grabbed his last pistol and fired. The first shot hit a servitor square in the chest, but the creature didn't stop. It lurched forward, dragging one broken leg, smoke seeping from the wound. The blast only made the red glow in its eyes brighter. The Mechanicus had written into their flesh a failsafe, a post-mortem directive to protect the sanctity of the Magos and his work. Now that their master was dead, they followed the final command: eliminate the heretics. The intruder fired again, the shots lighting up the room like red lightning. A servitor's jaw exploded in shards of steel and bone, but another crawled over it, faster, more frenzied. "Move," he shouted to the guardsman. The wounded man stumbled forward, dragging his half-dead body through a pool of blood. His breathing was ragged, each inhale a rattle. Behind him, the army of reanimated machine men closed in, their limbs twitching in chaotic rhythm, like marionettes guided by unseen hands. The intruder kicked open a door and pulled the guardsman through just as the first servitor reached him. He slammed his shoulder against the control panel, forcing it to spark, and jammed the door shut. Metal claws scraped against the other side, pounding with maddened force. Inside the corridor, the light was even dimmer. Warning runes glowed on the walls, pulsing in strange binary sequences. The intruder wiped blood from his face and turned to the guardsman, who was barely conscious. "Stay with me," he hissed. "What did they do to you?" The guardsman's eyes rolled. He said the flesh must yield. "He cut into me, he convulsed suddenly, his body arching. Sparks erupted from his mechanical arm as it tried to move on its own. It's talking inside my head." The intruder knelt, eyes narrowing, talking. "Voices," the guardsman whispered, clutching his skull. "Binary code. I don't understand it, but it's screaming. The machines are screaming." And then they both heard it. Not the sound of metal or servos or hydraulics, but whispers. Electronic whispers echoing through the corridors as though the walls themselves murmured. The Vox speakers embedded in the ceiling flickered to life, and a distorted voice, cold, yet dripping with fury, spilled from them. "Unfinished work cannot leave the sanctum." The intruder's blood ran cold. It was Magos Vale's voice, or what was left of it. He looked back toward the locked door. Through the crack, he could see the faint red glow of servitor optics. They weren't stopping. They were piling onto each other, tearing at the door with relentless precision. And above it all, Vale's voice grew louder, fragmented, mechanical, but unmistakable. You desecrate my temple flesh, must obey. The intruder grabbed the guardsman's arm and pulled him down the hallway. We're leaving now. They ran, or rather, staggered, through the labyrinthine corridors of the Mechanicus facility. Pipes hissed overhead, leaking steam that obscured their vision. The air was thick, the heat rising as if the entire complex were alive. Somewhere in the distance, alarms blared. The intruder's mind raced. Vale was dead, but his mind, his consciousness, must have been uploaded into the facility's core. The Magos wasn't just a man anymore, he was the machine. And every servitor, every cogitator, every surgical drone now moved by his will. Faster, he urged, dragging the guardsman along. Behind them, the pounding of metal feet grew louder. The servitors were coming. They turned a corner and stumbled into another surgical bay, smaller, darker. Dozens of stasis pods lined the walls. Each one contained a body, men, women, soldiers, all half-transformed. Tubes and needles pierced their bodies, feeding fluids that kept them in a suspended half-death. The intruder's stomach churned as he realized what this room was, an archive of failed experiments. The guardsman stared, trembling. "Saints preserve us." As if hearing him, the lights above flickered, and the pods began to open one by one. Hissing steam filled the air. Vale's voice came again, louder, more furious. "Witness perfection, the flesh reborn in obedience." The first pod cracked open, spilling out a corpse stitched together with metal, its ribcage exposed, its jaw reinforced with brass. It fell forward, clawing at the floor, then another and another. The intruder opened fire again, plasma bursts lighting the room in violent flashes of blue. The air filled with the smell of burning meat and molten steel. But there were too many. They kept crawling, kept dragging themselves forward, even after losing limbs. He turned toward the guardsman, but the man was shaking violently now, his metal arm flaring with internal light. It's taking over," he screamed. The mechanical limbs seized his neck, forcing him to the floor. He fought it, teeth gritted, blood spraying from his mouth. "Kill me," he begged, "before it." The intruder hesitated, horror paralyzing him. Then the guardsman's eyes went white. His voice dropped to a flat mechanical monotone. "Flesh is weak, flesh is failure." The arm snapped his own spine backward. The crack echoed through the room. For a second, the body twitched, then stilled. The intruder raised his pistol, but before he could fire, the corpse stood up again. Its mechanical limb twitched, steadying itself. The guardsman's head turned with an unnatural jerk. His mouth opened, and Magos Vale's voice spoke through him. "You tried to steal my work. Now you are my work." The intruder stepped back, bile rising in his throat. "You're no god," he spat. "You're just a monster hiding in wires." The reanimated guardsman smiled, an expression far too wide to be human. "Then bow before your new machine god." He lunged. The intruder fired, the blast searing through the guardsman's torso, but he didn't stop. They crashed into the wall, the impact shattering glass. The intruder slammed his knife into the creature's throat and twisted. Sparks erupted, black ichor mixed with coolant. The hybrid screamed, half man, half machine, before collapsing in a heap. The intruder stood over it, chest heaving, drenched in blood and oil. Around him, the pods still hissed, shadows still moved. Vale's laughter echoed through every speaker, disembodied and omnipresent. "You cannot kill progress," the voice said. "You only delay its perfection." The intruder stared at the nearest wall, where the voice was loudest. "Then I'll burn your perfection to ash." He raised his plasma pistol and fired into the central control node. The explosion tore through the room, wires snapped, sparks cascaded, the air filled with the scent of burning circuitry. The red lights dimmed one by one. Then silence. The intruder fell to his knees, coughing, his rebreather cracked. His eyes burned from the smoke. Around him, the failed experiments lay still, their half-faces staring at nothing. He dragged himself up, leaning against the wall. The exit was near. He could feel it, one more hallway, one more chance at the surface. But as he limped toward the door, one last whisper reached his ear. Not from a speaker, not from a machine. From inside his mind. Flesh cannot escape the machine. And beneath his skin, faint but unmistakable, something moved. Smoke clung to the ceilings of the Mechanicus sanctum like funeral shrouds. The intruder, bloodied, half-choked, coughing from burnt air, staggered down the corridor. His rebreather was shattered, and every breath came with the taste of oil and ash. The light panels along the walls flickered weakly. The runes of the machine god, dimming one by one as the power grid died. His boots splashed in blood and coolant. The silence was heavier now, almost unnatural. The whir of servitors had stopped. The walls no longer pulsed with Vale's voice. It was as if the facility itself was holding its breath. But he knew better. It wasn't over. He reached the final door, the one marked with sigils he'd never seen before, their meaning half-censored even in the deepest Imperial data vaults. He placed his hand on the panel. The surface was warm, as though it still lived. The panel scanned his hand, buzzed, and clicked. The door hissed open. Inside was a chamber vast enough to swallow a cathedral. The ceiling was a dome of black steel, etched with circuitry that glowed faintly crimson. In the center stood a massive structure, part throne, part machine, part altar. Cables thicker than a man's torso descended from the ceiling, plunging into the heart of it. And upon that throne sat the remains of Mago's veil. At first, the intruder thought it was only a corpse, fused to the machinery, surrounded by skeletal arms of brass. But then, with a sound like the grinding of tectonic plates, Vale moved. His chest expanded with a hiss of pneumatics, and his remaining eye flickered open, no longer human, but a lens glowing with infinite red light. "Welcome back," the Magos said. His voice was calm now, no longer distorted, but impossibly deep. It carried through the chamber like thunder. "I was expecting you." The intruder raised his pistol, though his arm trembled. "You should be dead." "Death is irrelevant," Vale replied, gesturing slowly. The cables above pulsed in unison, like veins pumping black ichor. "The Omnissiah teaches us that flesh is transient, but I have found the true equation, the perfect synthesis." "You call this perfect?" The intruder spat, glancing around at the corpses fused to the walls, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, human bodies merged with machine parts, faces frozen in eternal agony. "You turned men into abominations." Vale tilted his head. "Abomination is a word of the ignorant." Look around you, agent. Every one of these lives gave form to the machine god's will. The Imperium sends its wounded to die in the mud. I gave them eternity. Eternity as slaves, the intruder growled. As servants of perfection, Vale corrected, a faint note of pride in his voice. I did not destroy them, I completed them. The intruder took a step closer, despite the pain in his leg. You uploaded your own mind into this place, didn't you? That's why it wouldn't die. A ripple of amusement passed through Vale's voice. Very perceptive. When the flesh failed me, I transcended it. The noosphere, the network of machine thought, is the true afterlife. I am everywhere now, in every cog, every spark, every whisper of current. Even now, I can hear your heartbeat struggling to match my rhythm. The intruder's skin prickled. His body ached, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. The wound on his shoulder burned fiercely, spreading warmth beneath the skin. He tore open his sleeve and froze. Tiny metallic threads were growing from the wound, coiling like vines of steel. No, he whispered. Yes, Vale said softly. Do you think you left my sanctum untouched? You were in my operating theater. You inhaled my air, touched my instruments. The machine flesh recognizes you now. You are becoming what you feared. The intruder stumbled back, clutching at the spreading infection. The tendrils crawled up his arm, thin and glistening, burrowing beneath his skin like living wire. His veins glowed faintly with dull red light. Get it off, he gasped, slashing at his arm with a knife. The blade cut deep, but instead of blood, silver fluid poured out. The veins closed again, sealing like melted metal. He screamed. Vale's voice softened, almost gentle. Don't fight it, you'll tear yourself apart. This is the gift denied to mankind, unity of purpose. No more weakness, no more decay. You will not die, not ever. The machine remembers everything. The intruder fell to his knees, the pain consuming him. His body convulsed as his nerves lit with electrical fire. The pistol slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Every muscle in his body seized. His mind flickered between pain and delirium, between fear and strange clarity. Through blurred vision, he saw Vale rise from the throne. The cables detached from his back with a sound like tearing sinew. He stepped down, or rather descended, carried by mechanical limbs that grew from the floor to hold him aloft. His body was a tangle of steel, flesh, and pulsing light. You see, intruder, Vale said, walking toward him, the flesh was never meant to remain pure. The Emperor himself sits upon a machine. Why should I not follow his sacred design? The intruder tried to reach for his weapon, but his fingers no longer obeyed. The wires beneath his skin tightened, pulling his arm toward his chest. His flesh bulged, reshaping itself. Something was changing inside him, not just physically, but mentally. He heard whispers again, mechanical, rhythmic, binary code pulsing in the back of his skull. But this time, he understood them. They weren't random sounds. They were instructions. Serve, obey, perfect. He clenched his jaw. I won't serve you. Vale knelt before him, his massive frame filling the intruder's vision. You already do, he said, voice almost pitying. The moment you stepped into my forge, you became mine. The intruder's body convulsed again. Sparks burst from his veins. He screamed, and the sound distorted, half human, half synthetic. His vision flickered. The world around him broke apart into streams of data, numbers, lines, patterns, everything glowing with impossible clarity. For one fleeting moment, he felt what Vale felt: the hum of machines, the pulse of planetary circuits, the heartbeat of Mars itself. It was beautiful, terrifyingly beautiful. Then the pain returned. He slammed his forehead into Vale's chest, knocking the Magos backward. The movement was instinct, a human reflex buried beneath the code. He rolled toward his fallen pistol, grabbed it, and raised it with his remaining strength. "For the Emperor," he whispered. Vale's single red eye glowed brighter. "The Emperor has no place here." The intruder fired. The plasma bolt tore through the Mago's torso, bursting out his back in a shower of molten light. The explosion threw them both across the chamber. Vale crashed against the throne, his cables flailing wildly, his mechanical limbs seizing. The chamber's power grid overloaded, lights flaring blinding white. The intruder lay on the ground, chest heaving, his vision dimmed. The metallic infection had reached his neck now. He could feel it moving toward his skull. He knew he had seconds, maybe less. He forced himself up, limping toward the control altar at the center of the room. The terminals were still active, streaming red runes of warning. His trembling fingers danced across them, typing the command he had memorized long ago, the code word for total purge. "Warning, warning, core meltdown imminent. Confirm Y end." He hit Y. The chamber roared to life. Energy surged through the walls, the floor trembling as if the planet itself was screaming. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Vale struggled to rise, his voice breaking apart into static. "You fool, you destroy perfection." The intruder turned toward him, face half covered in glowing circuitry. "No," he rasped, "I destroy you." The meltdown began. Flames burst from the walls, circuits ruptured, molten metal poured from the ceiling. The throne split apart, spilling its sacred fluids like blood. Vale screamed, not a mechanical sound, but a human one. The cables tore from his body as the core consumed itself, reducing everything to ash. The intruder stumbled toward the exit, every step agony. His legs failed halfway. He crawled, dragging himself across the floor, leaving behind streaks of silver and red. The blast came a second later. A wave of fire and molten steel swallowed the sanctum. The shockwave hurled him forward, out through the collapsing tunnel. He rolled onto the scorched surface outside and lay still beneath the red skis of Mars. "Silence!" He coughed, blood, no, not blood, silver fluid spilling from his mouth. His reflection in the dust showed half his face replaced by smooth, metallic plating. His eye glowed faintly, red like Vale. He stared at his hand. It twitched, responding not to his will, but to some hidden command. Deep within his skull, a voice whispered, "You cannot kill progress." He smiled weakly. "Maybe not," he said aloud, "but I can die trying." And then, finally, he did. Or so he thought. Far beneath the surface, deep in the ruins of the forge, a single light flickered back to life. The system rebooted. A soft whisper echoed through the network. Flesh and machine, one. And somewhere in the digital dark, Mago's Vale smiled again.